This is the next chapter, the Starry script as a key to Anthroposophical Christology. And there's a quote from Rudolf Steiner, December 12th, 1910. It is a provision of the spiritual world that every real spiritual fact appears in the script of the starry heavens. One of the most significant and also one of the most enigmatic aspects of Anthroposophical Christology is the description given by Rudolf Steiner in a lecture of January 27th, 1908, GA 102, of the mystery of the mystic Lamb, whereby Christ is characterized as one belonging to the whole cosmos, as the highest principle of the cosmic great sacrifice. The purpose of what follows is to evoke, on the basis of the preceding chapter, an understanding of this exceptionally important subject, and also to give a clear account of certain perspectives in Anthroposophical Christology that are revealed through such an understanding. To begin with, however, the relevant passage from the lecture referred to above must be quoted in full. There we read, "Let us return for a moment to what we said at the beginning of today's lecture. We have said that there are forces that arise and fall, forces that ascend to the sphere of the zodiac and forces that descend from it. Through what means has man entered into a situation whereby something can stream upwards from him? What has happened to man that something is enabled to stream upwards from out of his own being? He has arrived at this point through the long preparation that was accorded to his ego and its continuing further and further development. This ego has undergone a long preparation. For essentially all existence on old Saturn, old Sun, and old Moon, when the sheaths that were to receive the ego were created, was a preparation for the ego. In that time, other beings created a dwelling place for the ego. Now on the earth, this dwelling place has been fashioned to such a point that the ego was able to occupy its place within the human being. And from then on, the ego began to work in man through the outer bodily sheaths from within outwards. This working of the ego from within has at the same time brought it about that a superabundance of ascending and descending forces exceeding the bounds of equilibrium has come into being. So long as man's ego was not yet able to work within him, the ascending forces gradually evolved towards the middle of man's being, that is, towards the virgin. And when the ego started to become active in man, the forces had developed so far that their ascending and descending modes had come to balance one another. The introduction of the ego into man signifies that the ascending and descending forces held the balance. And it now rests with man himself to tip the scales in the right direction. Thus, occultists gave the name of the scales to the zodiacal sign that man was entering when the ego began to come into its own. Until the end of the Virgin, the deeds of the ego in our planetary evolution were indeed being prepared, though the ego had not yet fully come to itself. But from the moment of entering the scales, the ego itself began to participate, thus bringing about an important moment in its own development. Just think what it means that the ego has reached this stage of evolution. From then on, the ego is allowed to participate in the forces belonging to the zodiac. It is allowed to affect the zodiac by its actions. And this is completely true. The more the ego strives towards the highest point of its development, the further it works its way into the zodiac. Nothing happens in the innermost realm of the ego that does not extend in its consequence right up into the zodiac. This is absolutely true. And as man with his human ego actually lays the foundation whereby he evolves to Atma, or spirit man, so does he cultivate ever more and more the forces which place him in the position of sending his influence up into the scales. He will gain mastery in the region of the scales when he is penetrated with his ego through to Atma, or spirit man. Then he will be a being that pours forth something that has passed out of the stage of time into the stage of duration or eternity. However, as man thus goes on his way, there are other beings for whom man's highest realm of activity represents their lowest. Let us now go in search of these beings, whose lowest realm of activity is equivalent to that of man in the scales. If we inscribe man in the zodiac, we find him reaching to the realm of the scales, the spirit who belongs with his own being fully to the zodiac, whose forces belong entirely to the zodiac, and who reveals himself in planetary existence only at the lowest level of his activity, designated by the scales, just as man's lowest member is designated by the fishes, is that being who, as you may see, imbues our whole universe with life. Just as man receives, so does this being radiate life over our whole cosmos. This is the being who was able to bring the great sacrifice, and who is inscribed in the zodiac as the spirit that sacrifices himself for our world. As man aspires to the zodiac, so does this being grant to us his sacrificial offering from the sphere of the ram, which belongs to him as do the scales to man. And as man directs his ego to the scales, so does this being let his life stream forth over our sphere of existence as a sacrifice. That is why this being is designated as the sacrificial mystic lamb, for the lamb is the same as the ram, hence the designation of Christ as the sacrificial lamb or ram. Christ has now been characterized for you as belonging to the whole cosmos. His ego aspires to the ram, and when his ego streams upward to the ram, he himself becomes the great sacrifice. He relates thus to the whole of mankind, and in a certain way those beings and forces that exist on the earth are his creations. His abode is essentially in the sun, and through his creations he is connected with the moon and the earth, while his power lies in the constellation of the Lamb. Thus, the forces that enable him to become the creator of these beings lie in the constellation of the Ram or Lamb. The designation of sacrificial lamb or mystic lamb is drawn from heaven itself. This is one of the aspects, one of the views, to which one comes when one looks up from our narrowly confined existence into the heavenly expanses and sees how heavenly forces and beings interweave in the immensity of space. And through this, the forces which pass from one heavenly body to another gradually become just such forces as those which pass in the form of love and hatred from one human soul to another. We see soul forces passing hither and thither from star to star, and we learn to recognize that what is brought about and affected by such forces in the immensity of space is inscribed for us in the heavens. In this passage, we are directed towards a certain heavenly script that has been inscribed for us in the heavens. And we know from other lectures that, as anthroposophists, we have the task of learning to read this heavenly script. Let us try, my dear friends, says Rudolf Steiner in this connection, to make ourselves worthy of learning again to read this starry script in its new form. Let us try to learn to read it as it must be given to us today. Let us try to fathom a wisdom that can again reveal to us the connection between the earthly and the heavenly. And without the help of old traditions, so that in discovering it we may find how it may be unveiled in the present time. GA 149, January 2nd, 1914. Let us now try to read what has been inscribed for us in the starry script referred to in the above passage, on the basis of the indications that it contains. The first thing that strikes one, even at the first reading, is that two beings in particular are being spoken of here. The microcosmic being of man evolving from below, and the macrocosmic being of Christ descending from above, the mystic Lamb. We shall begin our considerations with the microcosmic being of man. According to the indications given in the quoted passage, the beginning of human ego development on earth is effected out of the forces associated with the region of the scales. This seems at first to contradict the fact that the spirits who in Lemurian times gave man the substance of his ego, the spirits of form, are connected more with the region of the scorpion eagle, while it is rather the spirits of movement who gave man his astral body on Old Moon that are connected with the scales. However, this contradiction is resolved if we take what follows into consideration. According to Rudolf Steiner, the impulse which moved the thrones to their world sacrifice on old Saturn was their contemplation of the cherubim in the environment of Saturn. It was precisely this contemplation which, as it were, so roused them that the thrones felt the will impulse to sacrifice themselves to the cherubim. That is the last picture to which we come when, going back in time, we approach Saturn. The sacrificial spirits of will bearing their sacrifices to the cherubim, GA 132, October 31st, 1911. And so we see that it is the cherubim who move the thrones to make their sacrifice. The same pattern is repeated on Old Sun. In this way we arrive at a picture of Old Sun. We think of a center in which is contained all that has come over from Old Saturn, the sacrificial deeds of the thrones for the cherubim and the spirits of wisdom, absorbed in contemplation of that sacrificial act. Through their contemplation of this sacrificial deed, they are induced to radiate out from themselves that which constitutes their own essence, streaming, flowing wisdom as the virtue of true giving. GA 132, November 7, 1911. It happens similarly on Old Moon, for now the spirits of movement are moved to their sacrifice through contemplating the consequences for Old Moon of the sacrifice of the spirits of wisdom on the sun. And finally, all this is repeated again, though now on a still lower level on the earth. Here the spirits of form are stirred by the spirits of movement to make the sacrifice that is theirs to bring. Hence, it corresponds entirely to the relevant occult facts if the first impulse towards the emergence of the individual ego is ascribed to the scales and not to the scorpion eagle. And Rudolf Steiner expresses himself here with the greatest precision in that he brings only the beginning of the development of the human ego into the connection with the scales. When the ego began to come into its own being, from the moment of entering the scales, the ego itself began to participate. Thus, the first initial, one could even say motivating impulse towards ego development proceeds from the spirits of movement, or the scales. Note 34a. It should be added that it was roughly in the middle of Atlantean times that man for the first time received mineral elements into his physical body, and was accordingly able to tread upon solid ground. This took place in the fourth epoch of Atlantis under the sign of the scorpion eagle. The consequence was that his ego, once it had penetrated the etheric body, was able to approach the bounds of the physical body. And this first contact of the human ego with the physical body brought about the first signs of individual earthly ego consciousness in man, whence he was able to begin to work independently on his sheaths from within. These possibilities opened up only in the fifth Atlantean epoch under the sign of the scales. This is not in contradiction with the fact that the full penetration of the human ego into matter, that is to say, its final union with the physical body, took place only in the 5th post-Atlantean epoch. This is not in contradiction with the fact that the full penetration of the human ego into matter, that is to say, its final union with the physical body, took place only in the 5th post-Atlantean epoch. From this time, too, the light part of the zodiac began to outweigh its darker aspect. Until then, that is, up to and including the 4th Atlantean epoch, which corresponds to the middle of all earthly evolution, the ascending and descending forces of the zodiac continued to balance one another out. So note 34b. Hence, in the scheme on page 37, where he inscribes man in the zodiac, Rudolf Steiner relates man's ego to the region of the archer. That is to say, he connects it with the activity of the spirits of personality, and not with that of the spirits of form, region of the scorpion eagle. This is due to the fact that in the scheme, man is inscribed in the cosmos not from the human point of view, that is, according to the process of his creation, but from the point of view of the hierarchies, in accordance with their lowest members as they correspond to the particular members of man's being. From this hierarchic standpoint, the lowest and also the oldest member of man's being is his physical body. With the angel, it is the etheric body. With the archangel, the astral body. And with the spirit of personality, arche, the human ego. With the spirit of form, the spirit self. With the spirit of movement, the life spirit. And finally, with the spirit of wisdom, the spirit man. Besides, it follows from the particular connection of the human ego with the spirits of personality that man has a relationship to the principle of thought, the rulers of which are the archai in our cycle of evolution. Rudolf Steiner puts it thus: the spirits of form pass over from the moon. Their lowest member is the ego. This ego they now sacrifice, and they impregnate man with it, so that the ego appears on the earth as a fructifying force streaming forth from the spirits of form, while the spirits of form come to have the spirit self or manas as the lowest member of their being. So if we wish to describe them, we would have to say, above us, surrounding us in the earthly atmosphere, the spirits of form hold sway. Their lowest member is the spirit self or manas in which they live and weave, and they have sacrificed that which they still had on the moon, the ego that works in all directions. They have poured this down in drops, and have impregnated man with its power. GA 102, February 29, 1908. Thus we have, in all, 3 steps in the process whereby man receives the gift of his ego. It is called forth by the spirits of movement, implemented by the spirits of form, and completed by the spirits of personality. This is expressed in the starry script as the movement from the scales through the eagle scorpion to the archer. Now the ego substance lives on the earth, and it gradually has to permeate the human sheaths. Further hierarchies help man in this task. According to Rudolf Steiner, the forces of the ego had penetrated the astral body by the end of the Lemurian age, and the etheric body during Atlantis, while towards the end of Atlantis and in the course of post-Atlantean evolution, they come to permeate the physical body. GA 102, February 29, 1908. As the ego forces were penetrating the astral and etheric bodies, man was still possessed of a high degree of clairvoyance. And in his clairvoyant consciousness, he perceived the archangels guiding his ego in the astral body, and later the angels guiding it in the etheric body. Only when the ego forces penetrated through to the physical body did the leadership of the higher hierarchies begin gradually to withdraw from man, so that by the time ego consciousness became finally immersed in the physical body, man had completely lost his ancient clairvoyance and was left to his own devices. Note 34c. Here we also have an indication that the hierarchies which above have a relationship in the Earth epoch to the process of the arising and development of the individual human ego are those ranging from the spirits of movement to the angels, that is, from the scales to the waterman. These beings who stand above these, beginning with the spirits of wisdom, virgin, do not have any direct relationship to this development. Thus, Rudolf Steiner says in the long passage quoted above, see pages 35 through 38, until the end of the virgin, the deeds of the ego in our planetary evolution were indeed being prepared, but the ego did not fully come to itself. This deepest point in the descent of the ego into matter was reached in the 5th post-Atlantean epoch. If we now return again to the Starry script, we find a correspondence to this development in the movement from the goat archangels to the waterman angels, and finally to the fishes, man. Note 35. The development indicated here should not be confused with the progress of the spring equinox through the constellations, which gives rise to the transition from one cultural epoch to another. For our object of consideration is first and foremost the way in which the various hierarchies have successively participated in human evolution, drawing as they do their forces from those regions of the zodiac which they are connected. However, it is also highly significant that in our 5th cultural epoch, which stands under the sign of the fishes, both streams of development have begun to coincide. Only now in the fishes does man experience to the full his isolation from the world of the hierarchies, but at the same time also his freedom. For in the physical body his ego is manifested only in the shadowy and insubstantial images of abstract thought, and because of their purely reflective character, these have no power to compel. GA 187, December 28, 1918. On the other hand, thanks to anthroposophy, there opens up for every individual, just from this point of deepest descent, and possibly of taking his higher development into his own hands and beginning his new, though now fully conscious, ascent into higher worlds. In terms of the Starry script, this would be seen as the way back from the fishes, through the waterman, the goat, and so forth, to the scales and even to the virgin. In terms of the anthroposophical path of knowledge, such a development would correspond to the path through the 7 stages of Christian Rosicrucian initiation, as described in Rudolf Steiner's Occult Science. In this case, the first stage, to study what has been given by spiritual science, using the normal faculty of judgment just as is acquired in the physical sense world, would correspond to a right union with the forces proceeding from the region of the fishes. The second stage, that of imagination, would correspond to an ascent to the forces coming from the region of the waterman. The stage of inspiration would lead to an ascent to the region of the goat, that of intuition to the forces of the archer, and that of knowledge of the correlations between microcosm and macrocosm to the forces of the scorpion eagle. Further, the merging with the macrocosm would be similarly associated with the forces of the scales, and finally divine bliss with the forces of the virgin. Note 36. All these connections could be developed and substantiated much more fully, but such a supplement would become a work in its own right. Hence, the author must eschew this here. The reader may find certain amplifications of what has been said in another of the author's works, where the correlation between the 7 stages of the Christian Rosicrucian path of knowledge and the 7 members of man's being is set forth. See S.O. Prokofieff, Rudolf Steiner, and the Founding of the New Mysteries. Chapter 5. As an example of such an ascent, belonging, it is true, to pre-Christian conditions of development, and for this reason having an altogether different character, one could take the individuality of Gautama Buddha. In Rudolf Steiner and the Founding of the New Mysteries, 1986, it has been shown that a being of the rank of Bodhisattva works within certain limits upon the forming of his spirit self. When the Bodhisattva becomes a Buddha, as was the case with Gautama in the 6th century before the birth of Christ, the possibility then opens up for him consciously to work inwardly upon the forming of the first rudiments of the life spirit. In the language of the Starry script, this means, see the scheme in the quotation from Rudolf Steiner on page 37, that every bodhisattva attains, though by a different path than is possible today, a direct experience of the zodiacal forces up to the region of the scorpion eagle. And this corresponds in Christian Rosicrucian initiation to the 5th stage, the knowledge of the correlation between microcosm and macrocosm. On becoming a Buddha, such an individuality advances further through the zodiac and attains to a direct experience of the forces from the region of the scales. This corresponds in Christian Rosicrucian initiation to the 6th stage, that of merging with the macrocosm. That is, in the case of Buddha, entering nirvana, after which there was no karmic necessity for him to incarnate again on the earth. If we now recall that the hierarchy of the spirits of movement is connected with the region of the scales, we shall be able to understand more deeply the following words of Rudolf Steiner. So this individuality of Gautama, who had been a bodhisattva, became a Buddha, that is, one of the spirits who receive what fills them as an inspiration not from the earthly sphere, but from the cosmos. Thus, he was withdrawn from the earthly sphere to nirvana, that is, to the realm where the earthly sphere no longer exerts any influence. The essential point is that from the moment the other spirits of the lower hierarchies fell away, and he was able, so to say, directly to approach those beings who we characterize as the normally evolved spirits of movement. GA 136, April 13, 1912. Before proceeding from an examination of the microcosmic path of man's ascent to a consideration of the macrocosmic path of the descent of the Christ being, it is necessary to direct our attention to a considerable change of position and function in the region of the scales, a transformation that occurred at a definite moment of earthly evolution. And so this makes me think of just the nature of the Hanged Man card and, him hanging upside down, and the force, like mem being the middle of the alphabet, and just like the inversion of everything. The concept of the ascending and descending zodiacal forces of which Rudolf Steiner speaks in the long passage quoted above may serve as a point of departure for us here. In the same lecture, though somewhat earlier, he defines these forces still more concretely. If you consider the whole zodiac, you must imagine that one part of its forces is descending and the other part ascending. Those forces which are today in an upward phase of development we take together, for they do, after all, belong to the constellations under the signs of the Ram, the Bull, the Twins, the Crab, the Lion, the Virgin, and the Scales. These are the 7 constellations that correspond to the ascending forces. Approximately 5 constellations correspond to the descending forces: the Scorpion, the Archer, the Goat, the Waterman, and the Fishes. GA 102, January 27, 1908. We should pay particular attention here to the word approximately, for it is indeed the case that the region of the scales has not always belonged to the so-called light signs, but became part of them in the middle of the Atlantean epoch. Only in the middle of the Atlantean epoch did the time arrive when, for the first time, conditions for human beings were such that the ascending forces began to prevail. If we were to measure the relationship to the zodiac of these descending and ascending forces from and to the zodiac before the middle of Atlantean times, we would have to say that they are in balance. We would then have to speak differently and reckon as the ascending forces the ram, the bull, the twins, the crab, the lion, and the virgin. We would have to assign the scales to another part, to the descending forces. GA 102, January 27, 1908. Note 37. This situation, which began to manifest itself in the middle of the Atlantean period, has become fully apparent only in our time. At the midpoint of our evolution, we were just in the middle of Atlantean times, and what men have gone through since Atlantean times is something that has gone a certain distance beyond the midpoint of our development. Hence, we may say that in a certain sense, already today, there are more forces that ascend to the zodiac than descend from it. GA 102, January 27, 1908. From this, we may see that the so-called light zodiac was fully formed only after the midpoint of Atlantean evolution, when the scales had joined the group of constellations that are associated with the ascending zodiacal forces. Seen in terms of the activity of the hierarchies, this means that a large group of the spirits of movement had embarked upon the path of gradual ascent to the rank of the spirits of wisdom. Such a development within the world of the hierarchies should not especially surprise us, for we already know from various revelations of spiritual science about a multitude of comparable events in the higher worlds. For example, in our own time, a whole series of spirits belonging to the hierarchy of the Archai have begun on a path of transformation into spirits of form. That is, in the language of the stars, they are seeking the transition from the region of the archer to that of the scorpion eagle, a change with which the whole character of modern initiation is deeply connected. GA 187, 28 and 31, or December 28th and 31st of 1918. For the moment, however, we shall not comment further upon this change in the region of the scales. Later, we shall come to see what significance this has for the evolution of our whole cosmos. Let us meanwhile continue somewhat further with the passage quoted above, pages 43 through to 44 to now. After Rudolf Steiner has enumerated all the regions belonging to the ascending and descending forces of the zodiac, 7 and 5 constellations, he continues his thought thus. So you see that the forces from the zodiac rise and fall, and that 7 constellations correspond to the ascending forces, and 5 to the descending. Those forces that are in the ascent and correspond also to man's higher members, to his higher, nobler qualities. Those forces that are on a descending line of development must first pass through man, must win for themselves in man that step through which they too become ascending forces. GA 102, January 27, 1908. We may best understand these words if we turn to the image of the centaur, bearing in mind that to a certain degree every individual in our time bears this being within himself, even though only a seer may perceive it. GA 145, March 28, 1913. Now, the centaur is half man and half animal. If we try to describe him in the language of the stars, we arrive at the following result. From the head, or ram, to the solar plexus, Virgo, the centaur is a man. Thereafter, from the reproductive organs to the feet, that is, from the scorpion to the fishes, Scorpio to Pisces, he is an animal. His hips, scales, occupy an intermediate position. They begin as human forms, but they continue as animal forms. In other words, in them, man, the centaur, finally overcomes his animality. If, for our time, we attribute the scales to the light signs, the 5 dark signs indicate to us the still animal-like nature of man, permeated as it is with descending forces. And it is just these descending forces that must without fail pass through man, in order that, through contact with the Christ impulse in man's ego, they may receive the strength for their future ascent. Thus, every individual who in our time enters consciously upon the path of modern Christian Rosicrucian initiation begins thereby to take a direct part in the transformation of the zodiac, in the transubstantiation of its dark regions into realms of light. For to the extent that man travels along the first stage of this path, he contributes to the cosmic forces from the region of the fishes, passing as they do through his ego, becoming forces of light in our cosmos. In accomplishing the second stage, he transforms in similar fashion the zodiacal region of the waterman, with the third stage the region of the goat, and so on until the sixth stage is reached, which signifies the highest point in the development of the individual ego, in the scales. And once all earthly humanity has accomplished this step, the whole dark zodiac will finally be changed into a region of light, while humanity, having completely transformed its own planetary origins, will be able to move on to a purely cosmic stellar creativity, the seventh stage. See note 37a. This redemption of the dark region of the zodiac, which man accomplishes through following the modern Christian Rosicrucian path of initiation, is also directly connected with the gradual redemption and transformation of the forces of evil in our cosmos. Compare GA 113, August 31st, 1908, August 31, 1909. For a more detailed examination of this question, see the present author's book, The Occult Significance of Forgiveness, 1992. Rudolf Steiner indicates this higher stage in the following words: he, man, will gain full mastery in the region of the scales when he has penetrated with his ego through to Atma, or spirit man, the virgin. Then he will be a being that pours forth something that has passed out of the stage of time into the stage of duration, or eternity. This is also an exceptionally important indication for the cosmic sphere of activity of the being of Anthroposophica. Whereas the first stage of the modern path of initiation is connected with the region of the fishes, that is, with the principle of the archetypal anthropos, see page 5, the seventh and last stage is connected with the region of the virgin, with the hierarchy of the spirits of wisdom, who are the representatives in our universe of the forces of the cosmic Sophia. Thus, through gradually overcoming in himself the forces of the whole planetary cosmos, man rises on this path from his present stage of development to the highest wisdom of the stars, to the divine Sophia, who forms his last stellar member in the mystic Lamb, and at the same time represents the gateway to the cosmic kingdom of the Christ. For the fundamental mission of anthroposophy in the world is this: to forge a path leading man from the confines of his earthly existence to a union with the cosmic Christ himself. Anthroposophy is a path of knowledge that would lead the spiritual in the human being to the spiritual in the universe. GA 26. As already observed, this sublime vista of future evolution is connected in our time above all with the modern path of initiation. This path is now open to all, but so far only a few are really traveling it. Nevertheless, the rest of humanity is by no means excluded from a positive path of development. That this is so is entirely due to the Christ impulse. For the absorption of Christian truths during the time that has elapsed since the mystery of Golgotha until our own time, leads to the transformation in man of the descending forces into ascending forces that work out of the region of the fishes, and the appearance of Christ in his etheric body out of the sphere of the angels, that is, beginning in our time, GA 152, May 2, 1913, and also published Occult Science and Occult Development, 1966, an occurrence that will gradually become perceptible to the awakening imaginative faculties of humanity, will lead to a similar transformation of the forces working in man out of the region of the waterman. Furthermore, after the passage of 3,000 years, the possibility will open up through inspiration that all humanity will be able to experience Christ in his astral body in the sphere of the archangels, and this will give the impulse for the transformation in man of the forces of the goat. Finally, Christ will still later reveal himself through intuition as the world ego in the sphere of the archai, and this will give human beings the possibility of transforming in themselves the forces that flow from the sphere of the archer. Note 38. See further details about these three revelations of Christ in GA 130, 921, and so September 9th, From Buddha to Christ, 1978, and September 18, 1911, Esoteric Christianity and the Mission of Christian Rosenkreutz, 1984. Now, the whole occult significance of the fact to which attention has already been drawn in Note 35 becomes clear, namely that in the epoch of the fishes, the zodiacal evolution wrought by the hierarchies as described above has begun to coincide with its historical counterpart. For the perception of the Christ in the etheric will become general in the sixth cultural epoch, which stands under the sign of the waterman. The perception of Christ in the astral in the seventh epoch, which stands under the sign of the goat, GA 130, September 21, 1911, and November 4 and 18, 1911. And finally, the perception of Christ as I, only after the war of all against all, in that far distant time when the point of the spring equinox falls in the region of the archer. Now that we have read in the Starry script about the past and the future of man, we may attempt also to read in it something about Christ himself, about the mystic Lamb, his life in the cosmos before the mystery of Golgotha, and his descent through all the worlds of the higher hierarchies to the earth and to humanity for the earth's fulfillment. But we must first prepare ourselves for this investigation, and we shall find suitable material for this in the information about the spiritual hierarchies contained in Rudolf Steiner's lecture cycle, Spiritual Beings in the Heavenly Bodies and in the Kingdoms of Nature, GA 136. In this cycle, in the lecture of April 10, 1912, we find the following classification of the hierarchies with respect to their activities in the fixed stars, the moving stars or planets, and the satellites of the planets, most especially in the moon sphere surrounding the Earth. In the fixed stars there worked the higher hierarchies from the seraphim to the spirits of wisdom inclusive. Within the planets, the seraphim to the spirits of form, and on the moon, in the sphere of the moon, the seraphim to the archangels. The sun has a special place in the scheme of things, having, as it does, two aspects, the starry and the planetary. However, even here, the above law holds good. The hierarchies from the seraphim to the spirits of wisdom are connected only with the starry aspect of the sun, while the spirits of movement and the spirits of form, whose activity also arises from the sun, are connected only with its planetary aspect. Now the inner meaning of the scales transition from the dark region of the zodiac to the light becomes clear. For that part of the spirits of movement that has entered upon the path of ascent to the rank of the spirits of wisdom has thus raised itself out of the sphere of planetary influences to the sphere of starry influences. And from this moment, the scales become the region of the zodiac under whose guidance all planetary forces are brought into a right relationship with those of the stars. This could also be expressed in the following way. The spirits of movement that are now connected with the scales do, as it were, hold the balance, in that they serve as mediators between the purely starry region of the spirits of wisdom, Virgo or the Virgin, and the planetary region of the spirits of form, Scorpion Eagle or Scorpio. Note 39. See also note 68 is all it says. In the aforementioned book by A. Turgenev, see note 55, two drawings from a notebook of Rudolf Steiner's from the year 1913 and 1914 are reproduced. They may be found next to one another. The drawing on the left is one of the preparatory sketches for the central form of the red west window, while that on the right characterizes the present position of the transition process of the scales from the dark planetary region of the zodiac to the light starry region. The latter drawing presents with full clarity a picture of the dual character of the scales in our time, connected as they still are on the one hand with the Scorpion Eagle, the region of the spirits of form, the west portal of the Goetheanum, and on the other hand with the Virgin, the region of the spirits of wisdom, the space of the small cupola, and through it with all subsequent ascending signs. This special place of the scales in the circle of the zodiac, which is connected with the fact that the sun is at one and the same time a planet and a star, can help us rightly to understand a further point in the long passage quoted earlier, one that may at first appear somewhat contradictory. Thus, in speaking about the higher goal of the development of the human ego and its attainment of the stage of spirit man, which, according to the scheme on page 37, has to do with the region of the Virgin, Rudolf Steiner associates this goal from another point of view with the scales, although the scales themselves are associated with the life spirit. In other words, Rudolf Steiner depicts a man as extending only as far as the scales, although in the circle of the zodiac he is inscribed as far as the Virgin. We have a somewhat similar situation with the Lamb, only in an above-below direction. Rudolf Steiner inscribes him into the zodiac only as far as the scales, while in a certain sense the region of the Eagle Scorpion also belongs to the cosmic body of the Lamb. Both realms, that of the Lamb and that of man, come into contact in the sign of the scales. And that is the reason why this sign is especially singled out by Rudolf Steiner. For the body of the Lamb is in its essence connected only with the world of fixed stars. And so Rudolf Steiner does not refer to the region of the Eagle in connection with it, since the Eagle, Scorpio, is the only planetary member of the Lamb. Note 40. That the region of the Eagle, Scorpion, enters into the body of the Lamb, even though only as its planetary member, is confirmed firstly through the fact that in ancient times Christ worked on the earth from the sun, most especially through the sixth son Elohim, belonging to the hierarchy of the spirits of form. GA 103, May 20, 1908, and secondly through the spiritual scientific facts contained in the lecture of August 27, 1924, GA 240. In this lecture, Rudolf Steiner speaks of how, in the course of his descent from the sun to the earth, Christ left his spirit man on the sun and subsequently his life spirit in the surroundings of the earth in the planetary world, and how he descended into the earthly sheaths of Jesus of Nazareth only with his spirit self. In the language of the Starry script, this could be expressed thus: Christ's spirit man is connected with the region of the Virgin, see the scheme on page 37, with which region is also associated with the higher starry aspect of the sun. His life spirit has a relationship to the region of the scales, where the influences of stars and planets come into contact and are harmonized. So, Christ's life spirit, working in the surroundings of the earth, fulfills just such a role here. Like a planet, it brings the higher starry influences into a right way of working on the earth. Finally, Christ's spirit self is connected with the region of the scorpion eagle, and at his incarnation on earth, Christ bears this relation into earthly existence, belonging as it does to the sole planetary member of the Lamb. Now we can turn directly to the process of the descent of the being of Christ out of the cosmic heights to the earth, endeavoring to portray this descent in the language of the Starry script. As a point of departure, we may place before our souls one more idea from the cycle: spiritual beings in the heavenly bodies and in the kingdoms of nature, GA 136. Here in the lecture of April 7, 1912, Rudolf Steiner tells us that there are beings in the cosmos besides those 9 heavenly hierarchies familiar to anthroposophists, and that these are more exalted and more all-embracing beings who form their individual members from the spirits of the various hierarchies. These beings are in their nature so sublime and so different from all that man is normally concerned with that it is only possible to come to a very distant impression of them through comparison or analogy. Here, Rudolf Steiner chooses to make a comparison with man. He says, just as man consists of a physical, an etheric, and an astral body, and further a sentient, an intellectual, and a consciousness soul, from the last of which he can, for the present, only gaze upwards at the higher trinity of Manas, Buddhi, and Atma, hovering above him, so do these cosmic beings similarly consist of 6 members only. They have as their lowest member not what we would call a physical body, but something that we would have to describe as an independent being, a spirit of form. Just as we live in the physical body, so do beings of more exalted sublimity live in such a way that they have as their lowest members the spirits of form, or, if you wish, a spirit of form. Instead of what we human beings have as our etheric body, these beings have spirits of movement as their second member. Instead of our astral body, these beings have spirits of wisdom. Instead of our human sentient soul, these beings have as their 4th member thrones or spirits of will. Instead of our intellectual soul, these beings have cherubim as their 5th member, and as their 6th, instead of our consciousness soul, they have seraphim. And as we gaze up at that which we shall acquire only gradually in the future of the earth, so do these beings gaze up at that which surpassed the being of the hierarchies. As we speak of our Manas, Buddhi, and Atma, the spirit self, life spirit, and spirit man, so do these beings gaze up, as it were, from their seraphic member, as we do from our consciousness soul, to a primal spirituality. Only there do these beings have anything analogous to what we call our inner spiritual life. It is extraordinarily difficult to awaken an idea of what presides over the hierarchies as the spiritual essence of the most exalted spirits. GA 136, April 7, 1912. If we would try to give expression to the essence of these most exalted spirits in star language, we must say that they belong to that region in the sky that stretches from the eagle, spirits of form, to the twins, seraphim. Now, taking Rudolf Steiner's comparison further, we may proceed also from the fact that man undergoes evolution. In the present time, the whole of humanity lives in the epoch of the consciousness soul. In the sixth cultural epoch, man will be overshone by the spirit self. This will be the first earthly anticipation of Jupiter. And in the seventh cultural epoch, the forces of the life spirit will, though indeed only as a gift from above, become accessible to him, and this will be the first anticipation of the future Venus condition. We may suppose something similar with regard to those most exalted spirits. As a result of their evolution, they are able to open up a still higher sphere of influence than that of the seraphim. For they can reveal what, according to Christian terminology, may be designated as the divine or Holy Spirit and the divine Son, the Son of God. In the language of the Starry script, this would mean that the most exalted spirits have incorporated into their highest seraphic member, which lies in the sign of the twins, the still higher influences from the regions of the bull and the ram. Thus, there would arise, in a certain sense, an eightfold essence that is directly in contact with the sphere beyond the zodiac. What would be the consequence of the arising of such a super essence? The result of this would be that for the first time in our cosmos, the possibility would be opened up for a direct working of the divine principle of the sun from above down to the hierarchy of the spirits of form, that is to say, to the sphere of the scorpion eagle, while this super essence would become the true cosmic body of the mystic Lamb. Is there in the history of our Earth's evolution an event which would confirm what has been said, that is, one which would testify to such a participation of the Sun himself in our planetary evolution through the spirits of form? Yes, such an event has occurred. The creation of man by the Elohim, as described in the Bible. Rudolf Steiner speaks about this event in the following words. The Elohim said, "Let us now create man." Then they wove together all that they could achieve individually into one great tapestry. All the activity that they had brought over from earlier stages they wove together in order finally to summon forth man. Thus, all these hierarchies, these precursors of man to whom we give the names of seraphim, cherubim, thrones, spirits of wisdom, movement, and form, archai, or spirits of personality, fire spirits, or archangels and angels, all these beings may be found working and weaving through all this creative work. And if we follow the Genesis account through to that crowning of the edifice that comes with man on the so-called sixth day of creation, if we consider the whole working and weaving of pre-human earthly evolution, we find all the various hierarchies involved. And all these hierarchies had to work together in order to prepare what finally manifested itself in man. Thus, we may say the seer or seers who gave us the book of Genesis had a clear awareness that all the aforesaid hierarchies must have participated in this work of preparing for man's creation. But they must also have been aware that for the begetting of man himself, the crowning fulfillment of this whole hierarchic order, further help was necessary from a region which, in a certain respect, lies still higher than all these hierarchies. Therefore, we look up beyond the sphere of the seraphim to a divine being as yet unknown, and whose existence can only be surmised. Let us trace the activity of one of these hierarchies, say that of the Elohim. So long as they had not come to the resolve to crown their works with the forming of man, it was sufficient for them to harmonize their own activity with that of the hierarchies up to and including the seraphim, that is, within the region from the scorpion eagle to the twins. But then help had to come from that region to which, faintly sensing it, we are lifting our spiritual gaze, that which lies still higher than that of the seraphim. GA 122, August 22, 1910. To this, it is still necessary to add what is of particular importance for our studies, namely Rudolf Steiner's further observations about the Elohim and their own inner development. When the Elohim decided to direct their creative activity to this dizzy height so that they could receive help from thence, that is, from the region above the seraphim, something had to take place that we want to understand in its full significance. They had, as it were, to grow beyond themselves. They had to learn to be capable of more than they had been during the period of preparation. The whole group of the Elohim had to grow beyond itself, for what man was then was only an idea in which they could work together. In this work they did, however, attain a high stage of development. They transformed their unitedness into a reality, so that they were no longer merely 7 individual beings, but this sevenhood became a wholeness. Hence, we could now speak of an Elohimhood revealing itself in a 7-fold way. Makes me think of how 7 times 13, or unity, Akkad, is 91, the Ha Elohim. And the Bible calls this essential oneness of the Elohim, in which the individual Elohim work actively as members, as organs, Yahweh Elohim. GA 122, August 22, 1910. If we set these words of Rudolf Steiner beside all that was said earlier, we may see that the 7-fold being that has arisen out of the merging of the Elohim forms a kind of reflection in the sphere of the spirits of form of that superessence referred to above. Thus, on the one hand, the Elohim belonging to the lowest rank of this superessence, and on the other they unite in their own sphere as a new being, whose 7 members represent, as it were, a microcosmic repetition of all 6 members of the superessence, from the spirits of form to the seraphim, while its 7th member reflects the development that we have already described of the superessence towards the sphere of the cosmic spirit or bull. Note 41. It follows from what has been said above that the 6 Elohim are a reflection in their sphere of those 6 members of the superessence which correspond in man to his 3 physical and 3 soul bodies: physical body, etheric body, astral body, sentient soul, intellectual soul, and consciousness soul. The 7th Elohim, Yahweh, is the being within this oneness that represents the ego principle. In his revelation to Moses, Yahweh says of himself, "I am that which was and is to come." Thus, his designation as the 7th Elohim is only relative, for he is essentially the 4th Elohim, the focus or center of the other 6. In his book, Theosophy, Rudolf Steiner speaks thus concerning the ego: when man says "I" to himself, something begins to speak in him that has to do with none of the worlds from which the sheaths, the 6 bodies mentioned above, are taken. The ego gives itself to the spirit, so that it may be filled by it. The spirit irradiates the ego and lives in it as in its sheath. It forms the ego from within outwards. This spirit that forms an ego and lives as an ego may be called the spirit self. The spirit self is a revelation of the spiritual world within the ego. This definition of the spirit self with regard to the ego characterizes, with the greatest precision, the relationship of Yahweh, the representative of the ego principle, to the cosmic archetype of the Spirit self, that is, to the Holy Spirit, the bull, Taurus, which proceeds as a revelation of higher worlds from the sphere above the hierarchies. Yahweh reached this higher stage, which enabled him to mirror the impulse of the Holy Spirit in the sphere of the spirits of form, through the sacrifice that he made in leaving the sun and transferring the center of his activity to the region of the moon. For this reason, Rudolf Steiner connects the impulse of the Holy Spirit with the spirit of the moon, and also speaks of Yahweh as bringer and bearer of the Holy Spirit. CGA 96, April 1st, 1907, and Festivals of the Seasons, published 1928. This also sheds light upon the question as to why worship of the golden calf was considered in the Old Testament as the greatest violation of the will of Yahweh. See pages 30 and note 31. Because of this, the sevenfold oneness of the Elohim is in the position of receiving as a whole into its midst an impulse from a still higher eighth sphere, the impulse of the sun, in order, with the help of this impulse, to create man truly in the image and likeness of God. Genesis 1:26-27. Herein we also have an indication of that event through which one planetary member, formed out of the totality of the seven Elohim, united with the cosmic body of the mystic Lamb, which had formerly consisted only of starry members. With all that has been said, we are now ready to examine in greater detail the process of the cosmic descent of the Sun principle, or Christ as mystic Lamb. As already said, the body of the mystic Lamb belongs fully to the world of the fixed stars, and with exception of the highest zodiacal regions of the Sun and the Spirit, Ram and Bull, it embraces above all the starry hierarchies from the seraphim to the spirits of wisdom, or in the language of the starry script, from the twins to the virgin. This is the sphere from which the mystic Lamb has sprung. In this sphere, the principle of the Sun, or the cosmic Christ, on entering the circle of the zodiac from the cosmic regions beyond through the gate of the Ram, comes to embrace all the regions of the zodiac as far as the Virgin. This is the first great sacrifice of the Sun, and at the same time the first stage of his descent to the earth, in the course of which the Sun principle is still connected only with the starry cosmos. However, in order to approach still closer to the earth, he must also find the path from the starry regions to the sphere of activity of the wandering stars, or planets. And for this, union with the Sun is necessary, for the connection with the planets is made within the bounds of Sun existence. According to modern spiritual science, Christ enters the Sun through the gate of one of the Sun spirits of wisdom. Rudolf Steiner describes it thus: this means that which in the language of the Hierarchies is Vishvakarman, in the language of Zarathustra, Ahura Mazda, that which in Egyptian culture, if we really understand what is behind the name, is called Osiris, and which in the language of the fourth cultural epoch is given the name of Christ, has radiated in through the gate of the Sun Spirit of Wisdom. He, the Sun Spirit of Wisdom, was the gate for directing our occult gaze out into limitless spheres, wherein the spirits of the higher hierarchies reside. But the gate of entry was the Spirit of Wisdom, the Sun Spirit of Wisdom. GA 136, April 13, 1912. And so the Sun principle, or the Christ, enters the sphere of the Sun through the gate of the Virgin, uniting at first only with what still belongs to its starry nature, that is, uniting with the Sun as a star, in order thereafter to find the path to the second planetary aspect of the Sun. Christ unites himself even within the bounds of Sun existence with the region of the spirits of movement, who, as we have seen, bring about the balance between the starry and the planetary worlds. In their realm, that is, in the region of the scales, Christ still abides within the limits of the archetypal body of the mystic Lamb. See scheme on page 37. For the starry forces still work directly in this sphere, although alternating with planetary influences. Note 42. In this region of the scales, there also occurs an intersection of the spiritual paths of Christ and Buddha. Christ descends into it from above, while Buddha, when he attains his Buddhahood, also enters into it only from below. From a somewhat different point of view, Rudolf Steiner speaks thus about their meeting. With this, we have characterized the bodhisattvas, who then become Buddhas in order to enter into nirvana. In the language of the starry script, into the region of the scales. See pages 42 through 43. Everything which works inwardly upon man's inner essence lives in a sphere that reaches up to nirvana. From the other side, there works into human nature such a being as the Christ. He works into the worlds to which bodhisattvas ascend when they leave the human realm in order themselves to learn, so that they may become teachers of humanity. Then from above, from yonder side, that is, through the gates of the Spirit of Wisdom, there comes to meet them such a being as the Christ. GA 116, October 25, 1909. It is necessary still to notice here that the meeting of Christ with beings of the rank of Bodhisattva takes place in a celestial sphere, that is, one stage lower than that of the meeting with the Buddha. Whereas Christ meets with the Buddha in the scales, entering this region from that of the Virgin, he meets up with the Bodhisattvas, again according to the starry script, in the eagle. Unfortunately, it is not possible to go into this in further detail here. In any case, what has been already said about the meeting of Christ and Buddha in the scales may shed some light on an utterance of Rudolf Steiner that is, at first, not easy to understand. Christ worked within Buddha as a bodhisattva. GA 109 and 111, May 31st, 1909, and From Buddha to Christ, 1978. Thus, by Buddha is meant in this case a human being who has reached the evolutionary stage of the scales, while by bodhisattva we are to understand a higher spiritual principle that overshines this human being and works through him from above out of the Virgin. Now Christ accomplishes the second great sacrifice, which is at the same time the second stage of his approach to the earth. He must pass from the starry members of the mystic Lamb to his lower planetary member, which corresponds in the language of the starry script to the region of the eagle scorpion. And that this happens is due to the capacity of the seven Sun Elohim to grow beyond themselves, and to form in their totality a new higher being which is capable of becoming the eighth, counting from above, planetary member of the Lamb. Thus, as a consequence of his second great sacrifice, Christ unites himself with the planetary aspect of the Sun, and through it also with all planetary activity within the bounds of our solar system. After this, in order to approach the Earth still more closely, Christ must descend yet one stage lower and pass from planetary existence to moon existence. If, as was already said above, see pages 47 through 48, the hierarchies from the seraphim to the spirits of form are active in planetary existence. In moon existence, they are now joined by the spirits of personality, archai, and the archangels. Hence, Christ must now leave the Sun through the gate of the scorpion eagle. This aspect of the scorpion, its dying aspect, may be felt especially in the following words whereby Rudolf Steiner characterizes this process. Cosmically, Christ died from the sun towards the earth. He came down to the earth. GA 240, August 27, 1924. In the descent to the sphere of the moon, we have the third great sacrifice of Christ, and at the same time the next stage on the path of his approach to the earth. This event could be expressed in the language of the Starry script by saying that Christ left the region of the scorpion eagle on his way to the earth, and after passing through the region of the archer, entered the region of the goat. The region of the goat is connected in particular with the hierarchy of the archangels, and here in their realm, Christ meets with the seven most important amongst them, and most especially with their son leader, the Archangel Michael, who from this time embarks upon the path that leads him to the gradual transformation from being the countenance of Yahweh to becoming the countenance of Christ. If, before turning to the last and greatest sacrifice of Christ, we now examine what we have already said from the standpoint of the spiritual historical evolution of mankind, we see that Christ's sojourn in the regions lying beyond the gate of the Sun Spirit of Wisdom, in the regions from the Ram to the Virgin, was known in ancient India by the seven holy Rishis, who at that time called him Vishvakarman, as his sojourn beyond the limits of the sphere. GA 136, April 13, 1912. For their sphere was only a region of planetary development which did not reach as far as the world of the fixed stars from the Virgin upwards. Note 43. The very number of the holy Rishis points most especially to their connection with the planetary sphere. According to Rudolf Steiner, the etheric bodies of the leading initiates of the seven planetary oracles of Atlantis were incarnated in the Indian Rishis, and that was the principal reason why their knowledge did not reach out beyond the sphere of activity of the individual planets. This could have been otherwise only for that Rishi who received the etheric body of the leading initiate of the Sun Oracle. However, this was not the case, as he received not the etheric body itself, but only its imprint. GA 109 and 111, January 21, 1909, printed in Some Aspects of Reincarnation and of the Life After Death, Typescript Z360, and Occult Science. Further, the sojourn of the Christ being in the region on this side of the gate of the Spirit of Wisdom, in the region of the spirits of movement, and in particular in that of the spirits of form, was perceived in the epoch of ancient Persia by Zarathustra as Ahura Mazda, for this was the name that Zarathustra gave to Christ. This is the source of the dualism of their religion, for it is to be found in the character of the region of the scorpion eagle. On the one hand the eagle, on the other the scorpion. Note 44. This must not be regarded as being in contradiction with the fact that the point of the spring equinox during the second post-Atlantean epoch was in the twins. For we have to do here with two different streams of evolution which first begin to intersect, and even to coincide, only in the present epoch of the fishes. For from our time onwards there stands before all humanity the task of learning to work in full consciousness with the hierarchies. Lastly, the descent of the Christ being through the gate of the goat to the moon sphere was apprehended directly in the sphere of the earth and even in the earthly elemental world. The Christ being was, as we saw, working out of the sphere of the archangels, and through them was revealed in various ways to the peoples of the earth. To the Greeks as Apollo, to the Egyptians as Osiris, in Asia Minor as Adonis, in Persia as Mithras, in the European north as Balder, and in ancient Israel as Ehe Asher Ehe, I am the I am. In the burning bush before Moses on Mount Sinai, note 44a, This does not, however, exclude the fact that among these names of the gods of the ancient world, there are not only archangels, but also beings of other hierarchies working and weaving. For example, according to ancient Hebrew occult tradition, it was Yahweh, a spirit of form, who worked through the archangel Michael, or Michael. Now, the being of Christ is quite close to the earth, and there still stands before him the fourth and greatest sacrifice, that which signifies his separation from the sphere of the hierarchies and his union on the earth itself with the man Jesus of Nazareth, who stands under the influence of the region of the fishes. For it behoves him to become the firstborn and the forefather of mankind as the new 10th hierarchy. Christ descends to this highest sacrifice, which is fulfilled through the mystery of Golgotha. Yet for this purpose am I come to this hour. John 12:27. Leaving the sphere of the goat and bypassing the region of the angels. GA 152, June 1st, 1914, published in The Four Sacrifices of Christ, 1944. He plunges directly into the sheaths of Jesus. When the scene of the baptism is correctly depicted, the angels are always placed on the right in a separate group and in the distance, for at this stage they contemplate the final act in the drama of Christ's descent only from outside. Let us now once more examine the whole path and note its most important stages. Firstly, the Christ being as a sun principle enters the circle of the zodiac through the gate of the ram. As a result, through his sacrificial offering to the whole created cosmos, Christ becomes the great sacrifice, the mystic lamb, embracing all the starry hierarchies as far as the spirits of wisdom, and to some extent also the spirits of movement. This is the first sacrifice of Christ. Then Christ enters the sun through the gate of the Virgin, uniting himself at first only with its starry aspect, then gradually penetrating and spiritualizing the whole sun sphere with his own being. He unites with the planetary aspect of the sun, with the region of the spirits of form, and spreads his power over all the planets of our solar system. Second sacrifice. Next, Christ leaves the sun through the gate of the scorpion, and approaching ever closer to the earth enters the sphere of the moon, into the circle of the archangels. Third sacrifice. Finally, he leaves this sphere also through the gate of the goat, so as to directly unite at the baptism in the Jordan with the man Jesus of Nazareth. Fourth sacrifice. And so we have in all 4 great sacrifices which the Christ being accomplishes on his way to earth, each of which is connected with the passage through a particular gate. In the language of the starry script, we may designate them as the gates of the ram, the virgin, the scorpion eagle, the goat, and the fishes. The gate of the ram is the entrance to the sphere of the zodiac. The gates of the virgin and the scorpion eagle are connected with one another through being the entrance to and exit from the sun sphere, both therefore belonging to the sun, while the gate of the goat is the gate of the moon, the entrance to the moon sphere. Thus we have 3 cosmic steps in the descent of Christ: the starry ram, the solar in its 2 aspects, that of the virgin and that of the scorpion eagle, and the lunar or goat. To these 3 cosmic steps or sacrifices there is then added the 4th earthly step, fishes, which is connected with the greatest sacrifice of all, and this step is the uniting of Christ with Jesus at the baptism in the Jordan. Hence we may summarize the 4 stages in the descent of Christ from the cosmos to the earth in the following way. The first is the starry ram, the second is the solar, and the third is the lunar, and the 4th the earthly stage. With this, we now have a key to the words of Rudolf Steiner given above in their entirety, pages 37 through 8. The Christ's abode, is essentially in the sun, and he is connected through his creations with the moon and the earth, while his power lies in the constellation of the Lamb, or Ram. GA 102, January 27, 1908. This also sheds light upon the various names of Christ. When he enters the zodiac through the gate of the Ram, Christ is the sun, and on the sun he is the great sun spirit, an expression very frequently used by Rudolf Steiner. The name Christ, from the Greek Christos, the Lord's anointed, he receives only at that time when he extends his influence over the lunar surroundings of the earth, while on the earth he works as Jesus Christ, as God-man. And through all these stages, as though permeating them with a single stream, he radiates the idea of Christ as the Logos, or Word. From the region beyond the zodiac, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. It appears in the sphere of the zodiac in the region of the Ram as a new creative impulse. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. And there it sounds through all the descending ranks of the hierarchies. Note 45. Compare with the description of the fourth rhythm of the Christmas Foundation meeting in the 5th chapter of Rudolf Steiner and the Founding of the New Mysteries. Becoming on the sun in its starry aspect, life, in him was life, and in its planetary aspect, light, and the life was light. And then meeting and overcoming the dark forces in the sphere of the moon, and the light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not understood it, so as to become on the earth the incarnated Word, the God-man, Christ Jesus, and the Word became flesh. Thus we may truly say in Rudolf Steiner's words, Christ is, in his individual essence, not only to be thought of as dwelling for 3 years in the sheaths of Jesus of Nazareth, but also as the leader and guide of all the beings of the higher hierarchies. GA 129, August 21st, 1911. Note 45a. From what has been said, it becomes clear why, in his spiritual investigations, Rudolf Steiner characterizes the Christ being in so diverse a fashion. For on each occasion he describes the being of Christ in association with his activity through the various hierarchies in the course of his gradual approach to the earth. Rudolf Steiner is always concerned with a concrete investigation, which he carries out on various levels of world existence. If from this point of view we now take in at a glance the whole diversity of his Christological communications, we find they correspond fully with the 4 cosmic gates referred to above, through which the Christ being passes on his approach to the earth. Thus, in passing through the gate of the Ram, Christ is revealed in our cosmos as the sun. Rudolf Steiner repeatedly refers to this, especially in connection with his esoteric investigations of the Holy Trinity and of the Gospel of St. John. Then in passing through the gate of the Virgin, he reveals himself as a spirit of wisdom. GA 136, April 13, 1912. In passing through the gate of the Scorpion Eagle as the leader of the spirits of form, see Occult Science, as the power of the sixth son Elohim, GA 103, May 20, 1908, or as one of the Elohim, GA 245. Finally, in passing through the gate of the goat, he is revealed as the leader of the spirits of fire, archangels, GA 99, June 6, 1907, or as a spirit of fire, an archangel, GA 97, December 2nd, 1906, The Mystery of Golgotha, typescript Z60, and GA 175, February 20, 1917, Cosmic and Human Metamorphoses, published 1926. All these correlations, as given here, relate to the spatial aspect of the approach of Christ to earth. This process may also be considered in its temporal aspect. Then the principal stages in the descent of Christ correspond to the succession of the post-Atlantean cultures, the Indian, Persian, Egypto-Babylonian Semitic cultures, see pages 55 through 56, which are in their turn microcosmic reflections of the three previous incarnations of the earth, Saturn, Sun, and Moon. In this sense, we may say the working of the Christ being in the sphere of the zodiac or the light zodiac from the Ram to the Virgin corresponds to old Saturn. In this sense, we may say the working of the Christ being in the sphere of the light zodiac from the Ram to the Virgin corresponds to old Saturn. His union with the region from the Virgin to the Scorpion Eagle to old Sun, from the Scorpion Eagle to the Goat to old Moon, and from the Goat to the fishes and on from the fishes back up into the macrocosm to the earth. This temporal aspect of the descent of Christ, no less than its spatial aspect, finds its reflection in the prologue of St. John's Gospel. See the lecture of May 19, 1908 in Hamburg, GA 103. For the inner essence of this process lies beyond space and time, and has in them only a kind of reflection, which is, however, all that is accessible to the earthly faculties of human understanding. Even in the Gospels themselves, we find direct confirmation of the result of Rudolf Steiner's Christological investigations quoted at the beginning of this note. Thus, in the prologue of St. John's Gospel, Christ is first alluded to as the cosmic Logos and then as the Son, John 1:18. This designation corresponds to the stage of the Ram, the mystic Lamb. In the Gospel according to St. Mark 1:3, but also in many other places in the other Gospels, for example Luke 2:11, Christ is called Lord, or in Greek, Kyrios. That is, one who works out of the forces of the Kyriotetes, or dominions, the spirits of wisdom. This second designation corresponds to the stage of the Virgin. Then in the Gospel according to St. Matthew 1:28 through 29, and in the Gospel according to St. Mark 1:22, it is indicated that Christ taught as one who had authority, that is, one who works out of the forces of the exousia, powers, as spirit of form, Elohim. For, according to Rudolf Steiner, such is the meaning of the original text at this point of the Gospels. See GA 124, January 16 and February 2nd, 1911. In other words, he taught out of the forces springing from the cosmic region of the eagle, Scorpion. In addition, we find in the Gospels numerous allusions to the angelic beings serving Christ Jesus. For example, St. Matthew's Gospel, chapter 4, verse 11 and 26, 53, St. Mark's Gospel, chapter 1, verse 2 and 13, and St. John's Gospel, chapter 1, verse 51. In ruling over them, Christ acts out of the forces of the hierarchy of the archangels, who are connected with the cosmic region of the goat. Finally, beginning with the scene in the Garden of Gethsemane, and until the mystery of Golgotha, the great process of God becoming man is fulfilled. Now, having sacrificed all his macrocosmic forces, Christ unites himself completely with the sheaths of Jesus of Nazareth, who stands under the sign of the fish initiation. From now on, he is the Son of Man, who no longer rules over angels, but on the contrary, even needs their help as man. See Luke 22:43. For further details about the process referred to here of God becoming man, see S.O. Prokofieff, Rudolf Steiner, and the Founding of the New Mysteries, Chapter 3. There are, in truth, many more deep universal secrets that may be found through the reading of the Starry script. Note 46. Through all that has been said, there is one deeply significant fact that is illumined in a quite special way, namely that in the earthly biography of Rudolf Steiner, his birth takes place in the sign of the fishes, which determines the whole character of the fifth post-Atlantean epoch, and his death in the sign of the ram, and that between these all the other signs follow on in the order corresponding to their activity at the time of the 12 holy nights, which is an indication of the path from Jesus to Christ. See page 58. This truly Christmas-like constellation of his earthly life allows the possibility of approaching its mystery also from this point of view. However, such a study lies beyond the scope of the present work. In conclusion, we shall dwell further upon one only. The heavenly gates through which the Christ being passes in the macrocosm can, as was shown above, be designated with the signs of the ram, virgin, scorpion, eagle, and goat. If we now enumerate all 12 regions of the zodiac in the order that we followed in the descriptions of the 13 holy nights, beginning with the fishes, the feast of Jesus' birth, and on through to the ram, the feast of Christ's birth, we find in the third place the goat, in the fifth place the scorpion eagle, in the seventh place the virgin, and in the 12th place the ram. Thus we have in the mystery language of numbers a sequence that expresses the holiest and most sublime events in our cosmos. 1 in parentheses, 3, 5, 7, and 12. The first event of the fishes, 1, takes place not in the cosmos, but on Earth. As we know, Rudolf Steiner made use of this sequence at the laying of the foundation stone of the first Goetheanum, which was formed as a union of 2 dodecahedra, a large and a small, and then buried in the substance of the earth as a symbol of the striving human soul implanted as a microcosm in the macrocosm. Note 46a. The Christmas Foundation, Beginning of a New Cosmic Age, Dornoch, 1977, and Vancouver, 1984, page 30. The next quotation is taken from the same source. The translations from Rudolf Gross's book are essentially those of the English edition. The italics are those of the present author translator's note. Then this foundation stone was consecrated in a threefold way. First, as a symbol of the forces of the spiritual world directly surrounding the earth, the moon sphere, for all images, including the whole of ancient symbolism, which for the most part goes back to pre-Christian times, are simply a reflection of world secrets that were gleaned in the image-bearing sphere of the moon. Then, with 3, 5, 7 strokes on the small body and 12 on the large, the foundation stone was consecrated from a symbol to a sign. Rudolf Steiner explained this later in the following way. Thrice the human soul rises up to the 3 secrets of existence. First, they are symbols. Then they are tokens or signs. When the soul reads the eternal world word, but the profoundest depths of the world secrets are livingly united to the soul when this soul is able to create its own sheath out of the kingdom of the hierarchies. So the soul reads the eternal world word at the second stage, and this is connected with the fact that we no longer merely see the occult sign in imagination, but can hear it spiritually in inspiration, through reading the world word of the sun, as it is unceasingly revealed in the sun sphere. And finally, at the third stage, the soul must experience itself directly in the starry worlds, in the circle of the zodiac, in order to create for itself a sheath out of the forces of the higher hierarchies. The soul needs such a sheath in the higher spiritual spheres so as not to lose its individual ego, its self-consciousness. On the basis of what has been presented in this chapter, we could also say, the human soul, which in our epoch takes the initial impulse for its inner development from the region of the fishes, rises first to the moon sphere, to the sphere of activity of the forces proceeding from the region of the goat. Then it climbs to the sphere of the sun, where forces are working that issue from the region of the zodiac between the scorpion eagle and the virgin. And finally, it may unite with the forces that stream from the region beyond the gate of the virgin. The human soul is then truly born in the macrocosm in the starry worlds, when it has created its sheath not out of the forces of the higher hierarchies, but from the forces of the mystic Lamb itself. This threefold ascent occurred at the laying of the foundation stone of the first Gertianum at that moment when in the heavens Mercury as an evening star stood in Libra. Note 47. In the document that was incorporated in the foundation stone of the first Gertianum, there was, apart from the numerical relationship of 3, 5, 7, and 12, and the star constellation at the time of its laying, also an indication of the presence of the forces of all 12 regions of the zodiac. Thus the word placed in the center, Anthropos, and the letters above, JN, if we interpret these as referring to Jesus of Nazareth, that is, the Nathan soul, are related to the first region of the fishes. Then, in the names of all 9 hierarchies, we have an allusion to the zodiacal regions from the waterman to the twins, and finally, in the 3 Rosicrucian dicta, references to the region of the bull, the ram, and the 13th region which lies beyond the limits of the circle of the zodiac. The union with this sphere as a true initiation of the soul is experienced in the following words: as a cornerstone, which is formed out of the forces of the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. Which there's 3 signs, and one's just a line, then Aries and Taurus. Out of our will to seek ourselves in the Spirit, these words are connected with the initiation of the soul through the forces of the first hierarchy. Pisces, Cancer, Leo. Gemini, Cancer, Leo. Being that feels itself in the world's soul, this relates to the initiation of the human soul through the forces of the second hierarchy, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio. Human beings sensing their self in the world I. This relates to the initiation of the soul through the forces of the third hierarchy, Sagittarius, Capricorn, and Aquarius. We plant ... the 10th human hierarchy, Pisces. And all this together striving towards its realization. We have already seen that the region of the scales is connected with that sphere of the sun existence where there takes place the union and mutual interpenetration of the planetary and the starry cosmos. And that is also the region where, for the first time, the deeds of man as a planetary being can unite with the starry macrocosmic deeds of the higher hierarchies, when the individual human ego, striving to the highest point of its development, can participate in the forces belonging to the zodiac, can work effectively within the zodiac. GA 102, January 27, 1908. Such is the basic direction of human evolution from the present into the future. In the course of the second half of the present incarnation of the earth, which is under the rulership of the forces of Mercury, a beginning must be made towards its realization, and the anthroposophically orientated spiritual science of today is especially called to make this possible.